In the basement archives of Millbrook University, Dr. Evelyn Reed carefully handled a collection of old photographs that had been donated just weeks earlier. The images came from the estate of the Blackwood family, whose ancestors had once run an orphanage in rural Connecticut. Most of the pictures were typical for their time: formal portraits of children in Victorian dress, their faces serious and unsmiling as was customary in the 1880s. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It showed 24 children arranged in neat rows, flanked by stern-faced women in dark clothing. The brass nameplate at the bottom read, "Blackwood Orphanage for Wayward Children, 1883. For over a century, this image had sat in family albums and storage boxes, just another piece of historical documentation. But when Evelyn began the digitization process, scanning the photograph at high resolution for the university's digital archives, something extraordinary happened. A detail that had remained hidden for more than 140 years suddenly became visible, revealing a secret so disturbing that it would change everything she thought she knew about this seemingly innocent institution. What chilling secret was the Blackwood Orphanage hiding in plain sight, and why did someone try so hard to make sure it was never seen? Dr. Evelyn Reed had been the university's head archivist for nearly 15 years. She prided herself on being methodical and thorough, qualities that served her well when dealing with fragile historical documents. The Blackwood collection had arrived with little fanfare, just 3 cardboard boxes filled with papers, photographs, and miscellaneous items from the family's old estate. The orphanage had closed in 1889, and most of its records had been thought lost to time. As she carefully placed the 1883 group photograph onto the high-resolution scanner, Evelyn noticed something odd. There was a faded, brownish stain covering part of the image, specifically over the hands of a young boy standing in the back row. The stain looked deliberate, as if someone had applied a chemical solution to that specific area of the photograph. This kind of damage wasn't uncommon in old photographs, but something about its precise placement struck her as unusual. The scanning process took nearly an hour to complete at the resolution she needed for proper archival storage. When the digital image appeared on her computer screen, Evelyn began her standard restoration work, using specialized software to clean up dust, scratches, and other age-related damage. She started with the obvious flaws: small tears along the edges, water spots near the corners, and general fading that had occurred over the decades. Then she turned her attention to the mysterious stain covering the boy's hands. Using digital restoration tools, she carefully began to remove the chemical discoloration, layer by layer, pixel by pixel. What she uncovered beneath that stain would haunt her for years to come. The boy's hands were wrong. Terribly, impossibly wrong. Where normal fingers should have been, there were elongated, unnaturally thin appendages that extended far beyond what human anatomy would allow. At the tips of each finger were dark, claw-like growths that resembled talons more than fingernails. The detail was subtle enough that it wouldn't have been visible in the original print, but the high-resolution scan revealed every horrifying detail. Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief, zooming in and out, adjusting the contrast and brightness, hoping she was seeing things that weren't really there. But no matter how she examined the image, the conclusion remained the same. This child had physical characteristics that were biologically impossible for a human being. Her hands shaking slightly, Evelyn saved the restored image and immediately began researching the Blackwood Orphanage. The public records were surprisingly sparse for an institution that had operated for nearly a decade. What she could find painted a picture of a respectable establishment, a place where orphaned and abandoned children received education, religious instruction, and preparation for useful lives in society. The orphanage had been founded by Margaret Blackwood in 1879 and had housed between 20 and 30 children at any given time. It had employed several teachers, housekeepers, and a physician named Dr. Alistair Finch. The official records showed nothing unusual, nothing that would explain what she had discovered in the photograph. Frustrated by the lack of information, Evelyn returned to the donated boxes, this time searching more carefully through the papers and documents. Hidden beneath layers of mundane correspondence and financial records, she found something that made her heart race. It was a smaller wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, that had been wrapped in oiled cloth and tucked into the corner of the largest container. Inside were the internal records of the Blackwood Orphanage, files that had never been part of the official documentation. Most of these files contained routine information about individual children, their ages, backgrounds, behavior reports, and eventual placements with families or other institutions. But when Evelyn found the file for Thomas Whitmore, the boy from the photograph, almost every page had been covered with thick black ink, completely obscuring whatever had originally been written there. The heavy redaction of Thomas's file only deepened the mystery. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide information about one particular child? Evelyn continued searching through the box, hoping to find some explanation for what she had discovered. Near the bottom, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, she found what would prove to be the key to the entire puzzle. It was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with cramped handwriting. The name embossed on the cover read, Dr. Alistair Finch, and the dates indicated it had been kept from 1880 to 1885, covering almost the entire period of the orphanage's operation. Dr. Finch's journal began innocuously enough, with routine entries about his medical duties at the orphanage. He wrote about treating common childhood illnesses, monitoring the children's physical development, and working with the staff to maintain proper sanitary conditions. But as Evelyn read deeper into the journal, the entries began to take on a darker tone. Finch wrote about meetings with the Society, a group he described as benefactors and supporters of the orphanage's work. These weren't ordinary donors interested in charitable giving. According to Finch's increasingly concerned observations, the Society had very specific ideas about which children should be brought to Blackwood and what should be done with them once they arrived. The journal revealed that the Blackwood Orphanage was not what it appeared to be. Behind its respectable facade, it was actually a research facility run by a secret organization that called itself the Order of the Ascending Dawn. The Society believed that certain children, those born from specific bloodlines that they had been tracking for generations, carried within them the dormant consciousness of an ancient non-human entity. Their goal was not to help these children integrate into society, but to awaken this sleeping presence through a series of carefully planned experiments and procedures. Dr. Finch had initially believed he was conducting legitimate medical research, studying unusual physical and mental characteristics that appeared in some of the orphanage's residents. Only gradually did he realize the true horror of what was taking place. The entries about Thomas Whitmore painted a picture of systematic abuse disguised as medical treatment. According to Finch's detailed notes, Thomas had been selected by the Society when he was just 7 years old, identified through their genealogical research as carrying the bloodline they sought. Over the course of 2 years, he had been subjected to various procedures that Finch described in increasingly horrified terms. These weren't medical treatments in any conventional sense, but ritualistic practices designed to encourage the emergence of what the Society called the true self, hidden within the child. Thomas's physical transformation, including the development of the claw-like fingers, was celebrated by the Society as proof that their methods were working. Dr. Finch's journal entries became more frantic as he realized the full extent of what he had become involved in. He wrote about Thomas's personality changes, describing how the cheerful, friendly boy had gradually become something else entirely, something that watched the other children with an intelligence that seemed far too old and calculating for his young age. The Society documented Thomas's transformation with the group photograph, intending it as a record of their first successful awakening. But Finch, now fully aware of the horror he had helped facilitate, deliberately damaged the photograph with a chemical solution, hoping to obscure the evidence of Thomas's physical changes and prevent the Society from using the image for their purposes. The physician's later entries revealed that Blackwood was not an isolated case. The Order of the Ascending Dawn operated similar facilities across the United States and Europe, all working toward the same goal of awakening what they believed to be humanity's next evolutionary step. Finch wrote about correspondence he had intercepted, letters that spoke of other successful subjects and plans to expand their operations. He expressed growing terror about the true scope of the Society's influence, noting that many of its members held positions of power in government, academia, and religious institutions. The more he learned, the more he realized that he was dealing with an organization that had been operating for centuries, carefully guiding human development toward their ultimate objective. In his final entries, written in a handwriting that grew increasingly erratic and desperate, Dr. Finch revealed what he had learned about the Society's ultimate goal. The entity they sought to awaken didn't simply grant its host unusual physical characteristics. According to ancient texts, the Society guarded carefully. Successful subjects gained dramatically extended lifespans and intellectual capabilities far beyond normal human limits. But the price of this transformation was the complete loss of human empathy and conscience. The awakened beings retained their human memories and could mimic human behavior perfectly, but they were no longer truly human in any meaningful sense. They were something else, something that viewed ordinary people as nothing more than resources to be manipulated and consumed. The most chilling revelation in Finch's journal concerned the true purpose of the 1883 photograph. It wasn't just a record of their success with Thomas, but something the society called a bloodline marker. They believed that the genetic traits that made certain children suitable for awakening were hereditary, passed down through family lines over multiple generations. The photograph was intended to help future members of the society identify descendants of their successful subjects, allowing them to continue their work decades or even centuries later. Thomas's transformation was not an end in itself, but the beginning of a breeding program designed to create more suitable candidates for their experiments. Dr. Finch's final entry, dated just days before the orphanage's sudden closure in 1885, revealed his desperate plan to escape the society's influence. He had stolen as many records as possible, including the photograph and the internal files, hoping to gather enough evidence to expose their activities to the authorities. But he also wrote about his growing conviction that the society's power was too extensive and their influence too deeply rooted for conventional justice to stop them. His last words in the journal expressed his intention to hide the evidence somewhere safe, hoping that someone in the future might be able to use it to finally bring the truth to light. Evelyn sat in her quiet office, the weight of Dr. Finch's revelations settling over her like a heavy blanket. The photograph on her computer screen took on an entirely different meaning now. Thomas Whitmore hadn't been just another orphan in a Victorian institution. He had been the first successful subject in an experiment that had apparently continued for well over a century. The boy's inhuman features, hidden beneath chemical stains for more than 140 years, represented the beginning of something far more sinister than she could have imagined. The Order of the Ascending Dawn hadn't disappeared when the Blackwood Orphanage closed. According to Dr. Finch's research, they had simply become more careful, more secretive, continuing their work in ways that would be much harder to detect or stop. As she stared at the restored photograph, Evelyn noticed her computer's email notification chiming softly. She glanced at her inbox and felt her blood turn to ice. There was a new message from an address she didn't recognize, with no identifying information beyond a string of random numbers and letters. The subject line simply read, "Regarding your recent archival work." With trembling fingers, she opened the email. There was no text in the message body, just a single attached image. When she clicked to open it, her worst fears were confirmed. It was a modern, high-resolution photograph of a young boy who looked remarkably similar to Thomas Whitmore. The child was smiling at the camera, his eyes bright and innocent, but his hands were carefully positioned just outside the frame, hidden from view. At the bottom of the image, in small text, was a date stamp from just 3 days earlier. Evelyn understood immediately what this meant. The Order of the Ascending Dawn was still active, still watching, still continuing their work after all these years. Her discovery of the truth about the 1883 photograph hadn't gone unnoticed. Somehow, they knew exactly what she had found and were letting her know that they were aware of her investigation. The modern photograph was both a warning and a demonstration of their continued presence in the world. Thomas Whitmore's bloodline had survived, and the society was still using his descendants for their experiments. The boy in the recent photograph might be Thomas's great-great-grandson, or perhaps something even more disturbing, Thomas himself, sustained by the unnatural longevity that came with his transformation. Like this video if you found this story unsettling, and subscribe for more history that was meant to stay buried. What do you think happened next? Let us know in the comments below.